If you've been struggling to figure out how to study effectively for exams, I hope you've enjoyed parts 1 to 3 of our community's playlist on the foundational study skills and memory techniques most of us need to succeed. In today's fourth and final video in the series, I'm going to answer questions submitted by you, along with a few others I've received over the years. Whereas some of them require simple answers, others are quite nuanced questions, so I'll do my best to combine the general with the specific. Keep in mind that when I share these answers, they come from a combination of my own experiences in the trenches and years of research into how human brains learn. Plus, I've been through one of the ultimate exam sequences when I sat for my 2 field exams and defended my PhD. I'm sharing this background because not every technique or way I think of things will necessarily be right for you, but I'm sure you'll find each interesting, and I thank everyone who submitted questions for this video. You guys rock, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to serve. So without further ado, let's get started with Brad 1's question. This is a great question because depending on any external device is completely contrary to the incredible results a memory training regime based on the fundamentals we talked about in parts 1 to 3 of this playlist offer you as a learner. That said, if SRS works for you, I would suggest you try to understand why it's working. That way you can double down on the successful parts and you will learn a lot about the science behind the software and why they rarely tell you the whole story. Because the reality is, if you use SRS well in combination with the truly magnetic imagery I teach, it can help. In fact, the Memory Palace technique, when used properly, is the most advanced SRS there is, invented by ancient people who needed to memorize a lot more than just books. The only exception is that your mind is the operating system. The Memory Palace is the software program that receives the input, and the information you want to learn is the content you run through the combination of operating system and software. And this means 2 things. First, we can't stop depending on some level of repetition. We can only reduce the amount of repetition needed. The Memory Palace technique is the great reducer of repetition, but does not eliminate it. Just as a garden needs to be watered and weeded according to some kind of rhythm, the neurons in your brain also need nurture, and it really is quite like gardening as you grow the dendritic spines on the vines of your neurons so you can remember. And the truth is, we don't want to eliminate repetition. The whole reason we memorize things is so that we can repeat them. So never make repetition the enemy. The ability to repeat, ideally from a deeply synthesized basis that creates new knowledge, is the reason we learn in the first place. Second, to strengthen your use of the Memory Palace technique, practice it more often. Reduce the time spent on the SRS software in your hands and more time inside the Memory Palaces in your mind, ideally with a physical journal for testing purposes. This process will strengthen your active recall abilities, which is like watering those dendritic spines in your brain and strengthening the connections between all kinds of neurons so information flows with much greater speed. But you don't necessarily have to exclude SRS entirely. You can optimize the process and add a mnemonic element, though the problem there is that software is still so fiddly. There are simple operations you can perform using a Memory Palace that take mere seconds and minutes that would require dozens of hours combined on SRS. So the answer is simple. To reduce dependency on SRS and optimize the repetition rules still needed, but massively enhanced by the Memory Palace, practice the Memory Palace technique more often. As a concrete example of how I do this myself, I spend much time reading in libraries and parks without a device on me, or a device that goes online. If you simply must have a phone on you, consider getting one with limited or no roaming data so that when you're with your books, you're really with them. Or find some other way to keep yourself off the 450 open tabs and endless notifications streaming endlessly in as the effluvia of ubiquitous social media roars in. That in itself will help you remember more because it will free you to pay more attention. And again, I'm assuming you've covered the foundations covered in videos 1 to 3 of this series, much of which is essential for most lifelong learners who really want to get ahead. You also want to make sure that you're following robust patterns, which is what our video all about how many times to repeat the info in a Memory Palace is all about. Check it out, or check it out again, or check it out again, or check it out again, if you haven't already. Loomis' first question has no answer because everything always depends on the nature of the information, the nature of what it's needed for, and your current level of skill. You also couldn't ever know for certain that you've memorized something for a future moment that hasn't arrived yet, for the precise reason that the moment hasn't arrived yet. You might say that it is in this risk of potentially failing to remember that so much of the joy of using memory techniques resides. So let me tell you a story about a guy named Thomas Kraft. I met him at a business meeting in Brisbane where I demonstrated my ability to memorize everyone's name in the room. About 6 months later, I ran into Thomas in an elevator. Now, I originally panicked a bit, but not only had I memorized all the names for the short term needed to accurately demonstrate my ability to use the techniques at the meeting, I had also used recall rehearsal to get all the names at that meeting into long-term memory. Going that extra step, which really amounts to just a few minutes a day over the next week or so, was not done because I have faith in the techniques. It was done because I have every scientific reason to believe that using the techniques correctly will produce the desired results. Likewise, in the elevator, I had every reason to believe that if I just relaxed, took a deep breath, and let go of the outcome, I would remember his name. So that's what I did, and suddenly Thomas popped in my mind. And so I said Thomas, and Thomas said yes. And then I told him how relieved I was and explained how miraculous it felt to have a memory like that arrive pretty much on demand, with only what was probably 30 seconds of nervous tension and hesitation. And then when we got upstairs at a meeting where I was doing another memory demonstration, I memorized all those names again. So it's not really faith, but it is trust. And if I'd gotten it wrong, I'd just explain the truth. I probably hadn't done recall rehearsal enough, or maybe I was tired and it would come later. That rarely happens to me, but there is a video in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass where 2 years after this presentation, I went through all the names, but couldn't get one of them. So I simply explained that 99% recall is pretty good after 2 years. And quite frankly, it is. But there's no guarantee, and in the great pinball machine of life, I don't know when I might run into any of these people. And therein lies the excitement and the interesting aspect of memory. Being able to remember isn't nearly as interesting as figuring out why we forget and reducing forgetfulness to the bare minimum. If you work on it and trust the science in a way that guides your practice, you don't really need faith. But you will need courage, and that is an exercise that builds your mental strength. Now, in terms of making practicing recall more exciting, I think I've just given you some major clues. Take on the risk. Practice with a scientific attitude and gain experience by putting your neck on the line. Failure will teach you to pay more attention to your memory practice, and embracing the fact that you could fail makes it all so much more interesting. As for motivation, there are two kinds at least, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Earlier in this playlist, I gave you two very powerful resources regarding motivation and how you can use them to stimulate yourself. Overall, the trick is to build systems so that you don't require motivation. I do this day in and day out, and system building is highly personal. I give instructions for beginning to develop your own through a dedicated process of using a memory journal in my book, The Victorious Mind. Give it a read, put its suggestions into action, and you will probably never think of motivation or ever need it in the same way again. It is, when you rely on the science of memory, a pretty mushy concept, and mostly unnecessary in order to get massive results. By the way, if you're new here and you like learning and memory tips like these, please make sure to get subscribed, enable notifications so you don't miss a thing, and get involved in the discussion. And for the love of memory, hit that thumbs up. That's important because it helps me continue helping you and trains the robots to never forget the memory tradition we humans need in order to learn faster and remember more. And please remember this, the next time you're feeling bored or unmotivated. My dad always ragged on me when I was a teenager how lucky I was to go to school. He only finished grade 3 and never had the opportunities I did, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? He was right. It was an incredible opportunity, and no one took care to make sure he completed school in the way he encouraged me to do so. And there are so many people in the world who wish they had completed high school, gone to university. And so remind yourself how lucky you are to have the problem of needing to figure out how to study effectively for long hours. What I'm saying here is this: be grateful. Your boredom is a very interesting problem to have. There are many problems that aren't so interesting to have to solve. And that's not to diminish any discomfort you feel, but rather to place it in context. So instead of being bored, show up and solve the problem. You really just have to create your own recipes for injecting excitement into your life, which is what a lot of the strategy we talked about earlier in this series is all about. And finally, look for the parts in what you're studying that do interest you. If interest doesn't just spontaneously erupt, and we all have things we have to study that we don't necessarily love, then find one small thing to pique your interest and expand from there. And even if the topic you're studying doesn't thrill you, maybe you can find joy socializing with other people or spending time with your study buddies or accountability group or any of the other techniques you learned in the other parts of this 4-part playlist. I suggest you either pick up those half-used MPs for later or let them be and move on to others. If you're creating them with more space than you need, which is highly recommended, they're often going to have unused space. This is never an issue because they can be used as mini memory palaces later. Or you can just carry on and create and use more memory palaces, which is always a great policy either way. The most important thing is to keep moving with the technique because this develops both your spatial memory and your procedural memory. The more skills you have with spatial memory, the more you can use the multisensory visualization aspects of magnetic imagery that use the magnetic modes. And by continuing to move forward, your procedural memory develops so that the actions happen almost as if you're on autopilot. I say almost because, like riding a bike, you always have to do something, but it can be so automatic that you're barely thinking about it. And like riding a bike, sometimes you'll have to consciously switch gears and put a little more effort into it when climbing a steep hill. Other times it will be like coasting. Either way, you still have to maintain awareness that you are on a bike. Never take the environment or situation for granted because the journey always requires focused care in order to provide the fullest possible outcome. Well, I don't use it, and without being dogmatic, suggest people who are using it wean themselves away from such external devices. My reasons relate to the SRS discussion we had at the beginning of the video, but it goes without saying that Pareto has no place in the Hermetic tradition, which is all about enabling the self to operate without external trappings. Divide time from within. It's the only place it exists anyway. I do believe you know what I mean, but for those who don't and want to learn more about memory and its profound lessons from the Hermetic tradition, please check out parts 1 to 3 of our growing playlist on the art of memory. I think you'll find it very useful. This question is similar to one from Coach, who asks, how do you find images for abstract nouns? Adjective, for example. This answer is quite direct and simple. 1. Stop thinking that there is anything abstract about this word. 2. Use the same mnemonic tools you would use for any other word. Adso, from The Name of the Rose, fights Jack Nicholson over ownership of a television. The fight modifies all 3 of them. Ad plus Jack, or Jack plus TV. Note that we are not going to stop at an image, but push forward and apply all 8 magnetic modes in a memory palace so that the sound and meaning will be very difficult to forget. Regarding where in the memory palace to place words, you might find this answer frustrating, but it's really for you to find out. If you complete the free course at magneticmerrymethod.com/YT, it is difficult not to succeed because there is no one answer or one way that we place information in memory palaces. Remember, memory palaces are isomorphic, but not real. You are not really placing anything anywhere in a way that our language can express. This is why there are so many different memory teachers and memory teachings. All the descriptions and the words like memory palace and mind palace and Roman room, etc. are pointing you to a practice that is experiential. Whether we use the word beside or under or floating above is not going to get you there, though some teachers will just say, yeah, put the image beside the fridge. That's fine, but it's not accurate and not a deeply transformational way to teach these techniques. So let me put it this way. In business, there's a saying that you can either be rich or you can be right, but not both. I've chosen, for reasons our Hermeticists will understand, yet another path, which is to be true to our tradition and simply encourage you to dive in and practice. Like swimming or fishing, all the instruction manuals in the world cannot and will not replace taking action and feeling what it's like to interact with the real and the rod or the wind and the waves. Get in the water, my friend, and you will soon wonder why you allowed unanswerable questions to get in the way. It's so magnetic out here, my friends. Great question, and I would suggest you start by learning how to relax. Next, practice memorizing real-time information. You can use podcasts or movies to practice in the beginning and then build up to real-life situations. To test yourself, use a memory palace and write down things you remember from podcasts and then check your accuracy. In real-life situations, you can use bodies as mini memory palaces, and this is what I do when giving memory demonstrations in the public. For example, I will often do more than name people during my demonstrations. I'll tell them details of what they were talking about with others before the event started, and I overhear their small talk. I simply weave the information in space in a way that is tied to their body. Now, to get back to your coffee sucks, it might seem like I'm contradicting myself, but notice that I say in a way that is tied to their body. Not on their shoulders or beside them using an imaginary balloon tied to a wrist. I may do those things, but the skill is making the decision on the fly, not having set rules. That said, there are set rules that I follow, and these are covered in the free course at magneticmarymethod.com/YT. The freedom that comes from rules is that they are tremendously flexible after you practice them, but rarely budge an inch before you put them to use. And to be able to benefit from both rigid rules and flexibility, relaxation is the key. Learn to relax. Practice thoroughly, using the most robust memory techniques you can find from someone who doesn't Mickey Mouse them like so many other teachers do, so that you actually walk away with a mental martial art that serves for life, even if you are nervous, because all the relaxation in the world sometimes just doesn't cut it. Learn to be able to perform like the samurai who can still execute one last move even with his head cut off, like I did, completely free from faith, in the elevator with Thomas. The answer here is very simple, Susan. 1. Create proper memory palaces. Really focus on mastering the fundamentals. 2. Learn the tools of association for numbers, symbols, and words. 3. Learn the fundamentals of recall rehearsal. This is how you use the memory palace technique to get the info into long-term memory. 4. Practice the techniques consistently. 5. Repeat by continuing to study the techniques for more knowledge of how they work. After that, just make sure you get frequent practice with relevant information that improves your life in a spirit of experimentation that keeps you constantly entertained. Follow that model and you'll be able to memorize as much information as you want using the magnetic memory method. These are the rules I personally follow, and as my great mentor Tony Buzan once told me over dinner, the rules will set you free. The sooner you get started with the multiple memory palace network taught by the magnetic memory method, the sooner you can scale to any amount of information. For reasons we won't get into but are covered in The Victorious Mind, I'm no longer entirely convinced that time exists. But for those still living in a time-bound world, the answer is that I've been using them seriously since the winter of 2004. Year after year, using the technique daily keeps getting better and better. Around 2017, I started combining the memory palace technique in a way that accelerated my practice and took it to regions I never dreamed possible. But they are possible because, as Sam Harris has put it, there are meditation techniques that start to look like heroin without the needle. He mentions the research of Richard Davidson in this area, and I recommend Davidson's TEDx if you haven't seen it. I experience blissful consequences that come from combining mindfulness and meditation with memory techniques, and have created my own TEDx presentation about this, which you might also want to check out. I know that you're asking just for a general sense of how long I've been into this, but I think it's important to stress that what originally started as a skill I needed to pass some exams morphed into something I needed to learn a language well. But all along, it was moving me towards something much more useful, and combined, it really saved my life. And I believe that combining memory techniques with meditation will save many other lives too, which is why I will keep mentioning The Victorious Mind, something I hope you'll not only read, but hand to every teacher and doctor you know to help ensure that others have the chance to make this incredible connection. Do the answers in this video help you out? If so, make sure to hit that thumbs up and leave a comment. And stick around, because now I'll share some of the most common questions I've received over the years from students desperate to pass exams. The answer is, it depends. It's up to you how much information you need to remember and how prepared your body, mind, and environment are. Remember, I used to study for hours and hours at a time, for as many hours as I could. Yes, I do meditate, and yes, I learned how to turn off my thoughts completely for short periods of time. But really, you should be asking a different set of questions. What is your study goal? What are you trying to accomplish? How can you minimize time spent and maximize your results? To do that, learn the 80-20 rule. Learn the strategies we've covered throughout this playlist series and get it sorted. How long should you study in a single setting? The answer to this question is, it depends. Sound familiar? It's very personal as to what will work for each person. For example, my podcast guest Dave Farrow likes to study in 5 or 10 minute blasts. But I like long reading and focus sessions between 45 minutes and an hour. You need to experiment and find out what works for you. Split test. How long can you effectively focus at a stretch? What time of day do you focus best? What tools help you focus? For better study at night, use the techniques you learned earlier in the playlist to help you stay focused. Get up and stretch. Go for a walk. Change location. Use a well-lit location. Studying at night will also depend on what time of day is best for you. If you're a night owl, studying for long hours will work better than for the folks who do their best focusing early in the morning. To study consistently, it's important to make a plan and stick to it. Commit to at least a 90-day sprint to build the tools of consistency. Get your brain chemicals, dopamine and myelin, firing on autopilot to engage your procedural memory. The other techniques you learned in this series will also be helpful. Having things in space so you can't avoid them, scheduling so you don't miss sessions, etc. You also have to have a vision for yourself, and you need to spend some time strategically building your consistency. Rome wasn't built in a day. First, acknowledge that the world is distracting. Then use the tools at your disposal to minimize or eliminate those distractions you have control over. Turn off your devices. Don't bring devices with you. Turn off all notifications. Delete any apps that distract you. Turn your phone on airplane mode. Use apps that limit the amount of time you spend. You can also control your environment by closing your door, using noise-canceling headphones, removing any potentially distracting objects from the room, etc. And now you have more than just answers. You have simple techniques you can use to help you study effectively, plus the mind, body, scheduling, and environmental factors that can boost your focus and concentration. But you might be wondering, what should your next steps be? Well, with thanks to you for going through all 4 videos in this series, and thanks to the channel members who helped make it possible, now it's time to put your newfound knowledge into practice. And one way to do that is to become a channel member so I can start giving you some of the perks our existing supporters receive. Just click the join button below this video on YouTube and sign up for even more encouragement as the Magnetic Memory Method initiative continues to grow. Because here's the thing, you can read and learn everything in the world, but it won't do you any good if you don't do something with it. So take what you learned today and make a plan. Sit down now and schedule out the time you have before you have to take your exam. And then get ready to study effectively for long hours, coming back to this channel and the Magnetic Memory Method website whenever you need information and inspiration. And remember, everything you learned in all 4 videos of this playlist ties together. Make sure you've gone through everything and taken notes throughout. You need to understand the whole picture. If you want to keep ahead of the competition, making sure you've understood every detail will put you in good stead. And if you really want to shine, you'll want to become a memory master. And for that, the Memory Palace technique is essential. If you'd like more help with that, be sure to sign up for my free memory training kit at magneticmemorymethod.com so I can walk you through this most powerful of all the memory techniques step by step. Mastering the Memory Palace is one of the best ways to completely eliminate the stress as you stop studying for so long and refine the process for maximum effectiveness in minimum time. And when you're ready, please let me know if you enjoyed this 4-part series in the discussion, and I suggest you take your mental skills to the next level by also adding these 4 powerful brain exercises that improve memory next. See you there.